but I know he's going to have some great comments to share, and I want to give him an opportunity to join in our discussion here.
Well, I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and I particularly thank her for organizing this discussion tonight over the future of our nation. The discussion is going on right here in these hallowed halls of Congress is exactly the same discussion that's going on around dinner tables, over backyard fences, over coffee at Starbucks. Everybody understands that our nation is in great trouble. It's getting in deeper. And I think every citizen realizes that each of us has an important responsibility to play in being part of that discussion. The gentlelady is quite correct. California is in a world of hurt. It's followed exactly the same policies that this administration appears to be embarked upon. It's probably a couple of years further down the road than the rest of the nation, which offers us a very important warning of what happens when reckless spending, reckless deficits, and reckless tax increases all combine into a perfect storm. California's unemployment rate is now in double digits. This, a state that was once a golden land of opportunity, a state that used to have a recession-proof economy. It was always the last to see its unemployment rate rise. Now it's the first, and the reason is public policy. Mr. Speaker, I would like to add to that discussion tonight by broadening the discussion to a number of points that have been made by my friends on the majority side, blaming the Bush administration for the nation's economic woes. And I hope that I don't shock my friend from North Carolina to actually rise to join that chorus in some respect. We are all painfully aware that the Bush administration increased spending twice as fast as we saw it increase under the Democratic administration of Bill Clinton. The Bush administration's first stimulus bill added $160 billion to the national deficit through tax transfers, despite warnings that it would do nothing to stimulate the economy, and it didn't. The Bush administration's bailout bill last fall added another $700 billion to the nation's deficit, despite many warnings that it would not stabilize the economy, and it didn't. That administration ended with record spending, record borrowing, record deficits, and an economy in shambles. But my question to many of my friends in the majority, Mr. Speaker, is this. If record spending, record borrowing, and record deficits is the path to economic recovery, why aren't we already enjoying a period of unprecedented economic expansion? In fact, all of the bailouts and handouts and loan guarantees that have already been enacted add up to over $9.7 trillion, as we pointed out on this floor in the past. That is more than the modern-day cost, inflation-adjusted, of the space race, the Vietnam War, the Louisiana Purchase, the Marshall Plan, and the New Deal combined. The fact is, these policies don't stimulate an economy, they stifle it. And it doesn't matter whether these policies are enacted under a Democrat or a Republican, they don't work. They didn't work in the recession of 1929, when Republican President Herbert Hoover increased the marginal income tax rate in this country from 25% to 65% and piled up taxes on imports. They didn't work in the resulting depression of the 1930s, when nearly a decade of Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal spending failed to stimulate the economy. We forget that the unemployment rate in 1939 was actually slightly higher than it was in 1931. And we know from a year of failed bailouts and handouts and loan guarantees that these policies aren't working better today. Today, we learned that General Motors, despite billions of dollars of taxpayer bailouts, is still going under. Monday, we learned that AIG, despite billions of dollars of taxpayer bailouts, is still going under. Mr. Speaker, don't they understand that the sooner that we stop bailing out failed companies, the sooner we can begin a genuine economic recovery?
Would the gentleman yield?
Gladly.
I wrote this note down just after we started this session tonight, and I want to ask you if you have ever heard this famous quote by Einstein: "Stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result." Do you think that characterizes the situation that we find ourselves in?
I believe Professor Einstein said it was not the definition of stupidity, but insanity.
Insanity, excuse me, the definition
and I
of
certainly
insanity.
concur with that. And what we are seeing here in this new administration are the same mistakes multiplied that we've just seen in the last administration. You know, before the failed $700 billion Bush bailout bill, this nation's budget deficit was around $500 billion or so. Now, because of that mistake, the bailout bill, which, by the way, President Obama and many of my Democratic friends in the House supported and ultimately consummated, and because of all the other bills that have rushed through this House in the last few weeks with such reckless abandon, our deficit has tripled to $1.5 trillion for this year, on its way to an additional $1.75 trillion for next year. And as tempting as it is to censure the folly of the Bush administration's fiscal policies, I think we should be far more concerned with the greater leap in borrowing and spending that we are now pursuing under this administration. Now, Mr. Speaker, there is one institution that doesn't look back, and that's the stock market. The past is utterly irrelevant to the stock market. It doesn't care where the economy was yesterday. It cares very much where the economy will be tomorrow. The stock market is strictly a forward-looking measurement of what investors are betting will happen to our economy in the future under current policy. And the precipitous decline of the stock market since these new policies have been unveiled should be a warning to us all. Today, the stock market closed at its lowest point in 12 years. If the policies we're embarked upon were destined to save our economy, you'd think that those who make their living betting on the economy would be buying like crazy, and they're not. Mr. Speaker, perhaps we would do well then to stop the partisan bombast and to realize that bad policy produces bad results, whether the president is a Republican or a Democrat, and indeed that Professor Einstein was right. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results is indeed the definition of insanity. I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman from California for giving us a great history lesson and reminding us of the kinds of things that we ought to be about, again, regardless of what party we come from. And I want to say that I proudly voted against the bailout, predicted it would be a failure, voted every time in the last 4 years for reduced spending, because many of us who came here in 2005 could see what was ahead. I want to now yield some time to